turned into books and articles and all kinds of things. That basically revealed how American history has been whitewashed and pun intended, right? How the role and the brutality and the awful reality of human beings owning other human beings and having absolute power over them has been expunged by and large from our history. Is not taught in schools. It's not taught, just broadly. It's not part of our media. Every now and then maybe you'll get a movie like Django, but by and large it hasn't been there. And instead, we've been teaching the history of dead white guys, whether they're dead white guys, American dead white guys, or dead European white guys, Napoleon or Shakespeare or whatever. And so that's what's been our history. And so there's been an effort now in the last half a decade or so to say, let's start teaching the actual history of the United States. Yes, it might make white people feel uncomfortable, or yes, it may make people who have ancestors who were slaveholders feel uncomfortable, or yes, it may make us view those people who run around with Confederate flags, or or those towns that have Confederate hero statues out in front feel a little uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And you can't move forward if you don't know where you came from. You can't build a future without understanding your past. So, I think this has been broadly accepted across the United States. And in fact, the 1619 Project is starting to be taught in our schools. Thus, South Carolina's legislature just put forward a bill, Senate Bill 534. It's called the Restore America's Foundation Act, that would require at least 30 hours of instruction in United States foundational history. Now, where do you find this? In the 1776 report produced by the Trump administration about how wonderful the founders were. Any mention of slaves in there, slavery? No, not so much. Well, maybe they were happy, right? Come on. It's, this is where we're going. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Carol in Seattle. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's been about a year since I've seen you in Seattle Town Hall. Hello.
Oh, hopefully, maybe next year. I don't know. But hopefully
yeah, I
soon.
know. One of these years. So I've been thinking about wage theft, and if we were to collect that with our Social Security, like, say, females retiring, and adjust it by, let's say, 30%, or we could talk about any socioeconomic group that has been marginalized or wage thefted, whatever the word is. Yeah, how, that might be part of something that we can look at. It's not really reparations, but it's an adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I get it. I think your point is well taken, and I think it's, frankly, bizarre. Bizarre is not the right word. I get it. When they first created Social Security back in 1935, the idea was that, breadwinners were principally men at that time, and breadwinners would put money into the Social Security fund, and they would get money out of the Social Security fund that would allow them to maintain a slightly reduced version of the lifestyle that they had when they retired. And so we indexed the income that people get from Social Security to the kind of income that they had throughout their lives. But right now my Social Security is about 5 times larger than my wife's, which is wrong, I think. And secondly, it is several times larger than my mother-in-law, who's 90 years old, worked most of her life, but just never worked at really high-paying jobs, whereas Louise and I, usually the income was in my name, but Louise and I had built up and sold off a bunch of businesses in the 50 years we've been married, and on numerous occasions we had a lot of years where we had no income, but we also had a handful of years where we had just really, really high income, and therefore my Social Security pops. That's wrong. Everybody who's retired should be able to have a decent standard of living, regardless of how much they made as they were working, and women should not be getting less than men as a vestige of the fact that women were paid less than men, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I am completely with you, and I think it's an important issue. Carol, thank you for that, and thanks for bringing it up. Sue in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. Nice talking with you. Actually, I'm calling just as a shout-out to all Wisconsinites to remember to vote tomorrow. We have a very important spring election with a position for state superintendent of schools, and as a Democrat, I'm endorsing Jill Underly, and we also have a couple special elections coming up for an assembly district and also for a state district. So it's really important that Wisconsinites get out and vote tomorrow to our chance to express our vote and our power.
Has there been a good vote by mail
So,
campaign, Sue, put together?
yeah, we're past vote by mail right now. Today I'm phone banking just to make sure they have filled out their absentee ballots, and if not, to fill them out and try to drop them off at the poll tomorrow or to get to the polls. We have a lot of polls where there aren't a lot of people, and it might be a 5 or 10 minute wait. So I'm not in Madison or Milwaukee or those bigger districts. I live in Beaver Dam, which is small. But just get out and vote, Wisconsinites. You need to use your voice. That's all we have left.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much. And as Sue said, don't forget, democracy starts with you. You're it. Get out there, get active. And have a great afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with more great program. And but be good to yourself and the people around you. Hey, it's a tough time, but we're coming toward the end of this thing. I really think we are. And I'm very optimistic. We'll see you tomorrow.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Tuesday. Anthony Fauci is pointing out that 3-4 million people a day being vaccinated. This, by the way, this after Donald Trump had said, no, we don't need any more than 100,000 doses. Remember he turned them down? Biden had to scramble like crazy to order more doses for the country. It's incredible. But anyhow, Fauci says maybe no fourth wave. This is a big deal. We'll get into that a little later on in the program. In our second hour, I want to get into this decision by the parliamentarian yesterday and how we should strategize, how Democrats should be talking to each other, particularly given that Joe Manchin has stepped up to defend private equity and Wall Street in terms of not just Wall Street. It's like a subsection of Wall Street that has heavily funded his campaigns. These private equity leeches. That are benefiting from the corporate tax cut right now in a big way. In fact, they reinvented their corporate. Anyhow, we'll get into that in the second hour. But at the end of this hour, or no, at the end of the second hour, excuse me, I'm sorry. Debbie Hines is going to be with us, giving us an update on what's going on in the Chauvin trial, which is ongoing. And in our third hour, Dr. Michael Mann is going to drop by. Much of the West is in a decades-long megadrought. What does that mean? Where do we go next? Are we going to have to be using breathing aids, like the Easy Flow, just to make it through another fire season? I mean, last year, on top of the pandemic, we couldn't breathe in our own house. It's incredible. Anyhow, we'll get into that in the third hour with Dr. Michael Mann. But I wanted to start out with this kind of essential and fundamental question. Can depraved evangelical Christianity reform itself, or should it just go away? I mean, the Republicans and Donald Trump have thrown evangelical Christianity, and this goes back 40 years, but they've thrown evangelical Christianity into kind of a death spiral, at the very least, a full-blown crisis. And Republican politicians are now doubling down on exploiting religious people, and it's now killing churches, as well as killing people in a way that we haven't seen in living memory. I mean, we've watched absolute depravity wash across our body politic over the last couple of decades, right? Stolen election in 2000, being lied into 2 wars by Bush and Cheney. 4 years of a Trump presidency with literally nothing to show for it except for a huge tax cut for billionaires, the destruction of international relationships, thousands of children tortured, and 500,000 dead Americans. We had a president who raped women, who made fun of mentally disabled people, who tried to take away Obamacare, Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, and unemployment from American citizens, who intentionally tore America apart racially and religiously just for money and power. He ripped children from their mother's arms at the border. He tortured those kids for years, killing at least 7 of them. He called Nazi white supremacists very fine people. He tried to eliminate health care for poor Americans. He vilified refugees. And he did all this in the name of Christianity. I mean, let that sink in. Right? On January 6th, when they attacked the Capitol building, a large contingent of that group knelt and prayed before they began killing people. The day before, on January 5th, there was a whole bunch of the same people, the, quote, Christians among them, who marched in circles around the Capitol, chanting and praying, carrying giant wooden crosses. They called it their Jericho March because they thought that if they did this, it might cause the walls to come tumbling down. the next day so they could invade the Capitol. And hey, it looked like it would work for a while, right? This is not what Jesus would have done. He was preaching morality, not politics. He was preaching spirituality, not politics. And the consequences of this are pretty stark. Back when I was born in 1951, the average number of Americans who went to church every Sunday was 73%. It hit a low when George W. Bush lied us into the war in Iraq. That was 65%. But for the first time in the memory of anybody alive today, it has now dropped below half. 47% of Americans go to church. That's amazing. I mean, organized religion is collapsing. And this is not the first time that religion has been corrupted by politics or vice versa. It's the first time, in a really huge way. But this was a debate that went back to the founding of our republic. Jefferson and Madison had literally a years-long running debate about this in their letters and their correspondences. One of the results of it was Article 6 of the Constitution. There's no religious test. No person shall be subject to a religious test. Here it is, the exact language. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office of public trust under the United States. Any office of public trust, right? Dog catcher. You can't run for it or you can't say only Christians need apply. But this was the big debate that they had. Jefferson was convinced that if a priest, his favorite phrase, but he meant that more broadly, ever became a major political figure in America, that our republic was at risk. Jefferson, of course, was an atheist and a deist. James Madison was a churchgoer. I think he was a Presbyterian, as I recall. And he was concerned about something quite different. He was concerned that if government started helping out churches, that it would corrupt the churches. And it turns out, and in fact, Madison was so concerned about that his first veto when he became president in 1809, his first veto was to veto a law that Congress had passed to give money to churches in Washington, D.C. to open to run poorhouses. And he said, no, you can't do that. In fact, from his veto message, he said doing this would, quote, be a precedent for giving to religious societies as such a legal agency in carrying into effect a public and civil duty. He said instead the money has to go straight to the poorhouse, can't go through the churches. But all this really started in the 80s during the Reagan administration when Reagan hired the son of his vice president George H.W. Bush, that guy's son, George W. Bush, hired George W. Bush as an outreach guy to the evangelical community. And this is when, Falwell and Robertson and all these guys were really hitting their stride, and Jim Baker and Tammy Faye and their heated doghouse and their multi-million-dollar mansions. And Reagan just welcomed these people in. I mean, we've had Jeff Charlotte on this program talking about this too. And they've been fleeced. Evangelical Christians for 40 years now have been fleeced by their own pastors, the ravening wolves among the sheep. So where does this, and in fact, the single group in America that has the highest probability of saying, no, I won't get a vaccine, are white evangelicals. So where does this go? How does this play out? In Northern Europe and Scandinavia, churches are pretty much empty on Sundays. They're mostly just places to get married and to go to funerals. They're way scaled back. Is that the direction we're heading? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? I could argue either side of that, frankly. Are Republicans ever going to stop exploiting Christians for political gain? I mean, will the people of faith turn away from these modern-day Caesars who are reaching out their gnarled fingers, to extract money from their pockets and votes from them? I mean, this corruption of religion over a 40-year period by the Republican Party, very intentionally, and the corruption of the Republican Party by a bunch of religious leaders who wanted power and money, has just brought the whole institution to its knees, the institution of religion. Now, granted, there are strong progressive churches in the United States, and many of them are doing just fine, thank you very much. But how's this thing going to turn out? When religious leaders are literally killing their own people.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
By lying to them about the vaccine. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. How does this play out? And welcome back. Sharon in Sonora, California. Hey, Sharon, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I've been saying for quite a while now that religion's the problem and not the answer. There's a big difference from my perspective between faith and religion. Religion, it needs people in fear and in dread of others and in order to survive. And that's how they get you in to save your soul, and they tell you put money in the till. And from my perspective, all of it is aimed at destroying, the true relationship between ourselves and other life forms. And I have been really upset about it for a long time. And I am a church goer in a way, from the perspective that I do have one of the religions I think you were just talking about, that I do admire and believe in. The way it teaches religion or faith, what I call faith. And that is a belief in the wholeness of each one of us, and that everything gives to the other. It's all connected. Everything is all connected. And it can be almost proven, I think, in scientific ways. So
what you're describing, Sharon, is in one way is Wicca, which is a religion. And it's a set of beliefs that are widely embraced among traditionally liberal churches, the New Thought movement. I don't think that excludes these kind of traditional beliefs that we find mostly in indigenous societies.
Right.
Are not
yes.
wholly rejected by most progressive churches.
Yes, and in fact, it's the faith of the church that I go to is Unity.
Unity is probably the best example.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I believe, because that's how they handle their teaching, is all through the relationship of all things. General religion and most all of them, and maybe Buddhism is the next one that I'd say close. In my searching out religions that don't kill each other, I discovered that the Buddhists kind of do that too. So, until the crisis in Myanmar, formerly Burma, I don't believe that there had ever been a major campaign of extermination or warfare based on. There were Buddhists who executed those things, but in the name of Buddha, right? In the name of Buddhism. And even this isn't so much in the name of Buddhism, it's just, anti-Islam. It's because the Rohingya are Muslims. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, I think you're right. And I have always felt that way myself, that religion is, it serves it can serve a useful purpose, but like anything else, from a scalpel to a medicine, it can be used or it can be abused. And it seems to me that what we've seen is the power, the potency of religion being seriously abused over the recent years, and I mourn that, frankly, as a person who considers himself not religious, but spiritual. Yeah, Sharon, thank you very much. That was a very clarifying conversation there with Sharon. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes. We're coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 1 minute. Stick around.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Anthony Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. So let me just put a punctuation mark on some of this stuff and just clarify my specific thinking on it. This is all coming to a head right now, I think, in America, this whole issue of politics and religion, much like the issue of business and politics. I mean, you know, Mitch McConnell out there saying, well, you guys in the corporate world should just keep your noses to the grindstone and keep your mouths shut and keep putting money in our pockets. And basically, you know, the same kind of crisis is happening around religion. The Republican Party has exploited religion so much for the last 40 years. And you know, I mean, with like just transparent stuff like, you know, oh, we have to have prayers before everything, and all, you know, all the, which is exactly the opposite, by the way. If you go back and read the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said very clearly, you know, don't pray in public, just don't do it. Every time I go to church and people want to pray in public, I feel uncomfortable. It's right there in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, go into your closet, close the door, and pray in secret. He said, if you pray in public, you know, you're just doing that for your own ego. He's unambiguous about it. But I think that this distinction that between religion and spirituality is a really important one. Religion offers a couple of things. And these are very, very powerful things. They're deeply embedded in our personness, in our inner world. One of those is community. For many people, their church is their community, or is the best part of their community. And that's a powerful thing. And so you have a church leader now who's not just a church leader, but also a community leader, and then they get political. And what does that do to the community? It has the potential to shatter the community, or it can turn the community psychopathic. This is how crusades happen. Right? This is what Osama bin Laden exploited in a different religion, but this is what, you know, it's all the same stuff. So number one, they offer community. Number two, a well-functioning church, you know, like the Unity Church that I used to go to years ago. It's been quite a few years since I've been in a church, but outside of ceremonial stuff, but offered. And the SRF church that we used to go to and the Coptic church, all of them offered an entryway, an access point, a touch point, a button into a spiritual experience. Not an angry experience, not a fearful experience, not a us-them experience, but a spiritual experience. I am convinced, you know, there's that book, The God Spot, years ago that purported to have identified a part of our brain that when stimulated connects us to this feeling of oneness with all of the universe. And the theory was that as we die, that part of the brain activates and lights up, and we merge or we experience merging into the Godhead, or into the consciousness of the whole entire universe. And you know, it's kind of a cool thing. And apparently epileptics, people with epilepsy, experience this frequently, and so a lot of your mystics throughout history, and Joan of Arc, for example, was apparently an epileptic. St. Francis of Assisi. and perhaps St. John of the Cross. But whatever the mechanism is, I really believe, just from my own personal experience of having touched those moments of transcendence, both with and without entheogens, I think is the word, mind-altering drugs. I think that we're wired for this, right? We're wired for this sense of something greater than ourselves. I think it's right up there with love as just fundamental, or maybe it is another dimension of love. Love and the spiritual experience are like coming out of the same place. And the love that we feel for each other and for the people close to us is like a little piece of this larger experience that religion seeks to bring forward. And I think this is important stuff. We had, I spent a week with a group of about 20 people with His Holiness the Dalai Lama back in '99, I think the year it was. Harrison Ford narrated a movie about it. It's called Dalai Lama Renaissance, a documentary. And we talked about this at some length with His Holiness, about the spiritual experience and Buddhism's constant quest for that spiritual experience. Or you could say non-quest, because one of the things he pointed out is, the more you try, the less you get there, which is kind of talk about it's like a Rinzai Zen koan, Koan, these thought puzzles that are so confounding that you end up, your brain goes tilt and you suddenly experience enlightenment. As opposed to Soto Zen, where you experience enlightenment through sitting in meditation. But I think that there's like really powerful stuff here in religion being the organized form of spirituality that we practice. There's really powerful stuff in there that the charlatans in the Republican Party and the money-grubbing televangelists got their hands on in a big way in the 1980s. I mean, you've got now, billionaire and multi-millionaire televangelists. And it's not good for anything.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's not good for believers. It's not good for the country. It's not good for politics. It's not good for the churches. And now, because they're refusing to wear masks or take vaccines, it's killing people.
For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to 2 thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, But the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. Two feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract. Problems with the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the '70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that when it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot.
On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your phone calls. Dennis in Long Grove, Iowa. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind?
Well, thanks, Tom. To dovetail on a couple of things that you just were saying about the value of the church, one of them, of course, would be that over the millennia, it has taught people to understand the golden rule. Another would be that it's...
Well, hang on just a second, Dennis. You can look at any indigenous or aboriginal society that has ever been chronicled in history. Peter Farb does a great job of this in his book Man's Rise to Civilization, where he looks at 34 Native American communities at first contact in the 1600s. And every single one of them had at the core of their culture the equivalent of the golden rule. I don't think that it helps religion to say that people only learn morality by becoming religious. I just don't think that's a legitimate argument.
I agree. Just to point out, one other thing, and it's a shame that all this has happened because it has also provided sanctuary for women over the centuries who really need it because of other minorities. And other minorities. True. I call primarily because I'm a longtime church person. As a child, as an adult, I became an elder in the Presbyterian Church. Served in many capacities to the church, but I've left the church because of the discussion and the things that you've been talking about. Politics and the conservative movement has kind of stripped me of my faith, and it's really sad. They've also kind of stripped me of my patriotism, which is also very sad and kind of sickens me. So the conversation you're having here is important, and I appreciate the fact that you're addressing it with respect and in moderation in terms of the content of your talk. I don't know what more to add, but I just felt that I was, I've been deeply touched by these things in my own life, and the conservatives have taken things from me that, I don't know that will be replaced.
Do you think it's possible, Dennis, that those of us who have felt alienated from church going because of the intrusion of politics into the religious realm, and even in some cases churches preaching what might have at once been considered morality but is now heavily tainted with politics. Do you think it's possible that people moving away from organized religion might actually be moving deeper into a personal spirituality? That's been my personal experience. That I think I'm probably more, quote, spiritual now than I've ever been in my life, other than maybe when I first started really, on that path of exploration, which was in my teens. But it maybe in some regards, church going is an impediment to his spiritual development, personal spiritual development.
Well, that hasn't been my experience. I attended church, and I was deeply invested and involved in church community and so on, and I have left. One of the reasons really is because it seems to me that Jesus was the original bleeding heart liberal, but. Mm-hmm. Too much of organized religion and the people who claim to be Christians are antithetical to that thought. And so I become more of an agnostic, almost leaning toward atheism. And it's just a kind of a dramatic turnaround. And I think there are tens of thousands, if not,
but
millions.
What I'm trying to identify, Dennis, what I'm trying to identify is the difference in this conversation with you is the difference between a belief system and an experience. I have very real doubts about the, quote, divinity of Jesus being any more or less divine than any of the rest of us, and suspect that large parts of the story around him, which, were borrowed from Zoroastrianism and previous cultures, have served to perpetuate a quote religion, an institutional religion. But I do think he was a mystic, and I think that his teachings are important and valuable, and that you can have that spiritual experience without and there's no doubt in my mind that if there is a God, if there is some individual intellectual power in the universe, that it's not an old man sitting on a throne. That my personal take on it is that it is literally everything in creation, that we're all part of one giant thing, and that is consciousness. Even matter is consciousness. That's my shtick, right? That's my personal, and I don't, I could argue atheism and still feel that I'm connected to something that is extraordinary and grand and fills the universe, and thus have a spiritual experience.
Yeah, there are
totally weird here
out there that. No, you're not. You don't sound weird at all. I've heard of philosophies that can be argued literally where, there's an energy about the universe, and I'm not going to say this probably very articulately, but, there are energies at play within us and throughout the universe that represent, the concept of what you said.
Yeah, I tried this out on Eric Tyson, oh man, you know who I'm talking about, the famous scientist, when he was on our show recently. DeGrasse Tyson, I said, we all have consciousness, and we are a little tiny speck of the universe. Isn't it possible that our consciousness is a small part of a much larger consciousness? The entire universe is conscious. And he kind of dismissed it and said, that's like saying that the cream swirling in your coffee when you stir it is the coffee, and it's not. And I'm like, I didn't want to debate it with him, but anyhow, Dennis, I've got to move along. But thank you for a thoughtful conversation. I appreciate your call. Ann in Seattle. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Hi. Well, first of all, I'd like to just respond to the previous caller briefly that a lot of mainline Protestant denominations are not supporting those right-wing ideologies, or for that matter, the intrusion of religion on the public space. So, coming from that perspective, it's frustrating to see in the news all the time about what Christianity says about such and such, because it's usually the pretty noisy fundamentalists, and that's not the only option. But the reason I wanted to call in was to offer my own perspective on the separation of church and state. As a lawyer, I believe strongly in First Amendment separation, but as a Christian who grew up with a lot of Lutheran ministers in my Swedish family, I also share your interest in spirituality. In fact, in my 50s, I went to Yale Divinity School, and I never really answered my spiritual questions. I would ask questions like, isn't the Bible just a historical book that's written by men, for men, and mostly about men? And that wasn't really that popular among the theologians. So here's my point. I regret the polarization of this issue of separation of church and state. I don't think you have to be an agnostic or an atheist, as the previous caller mentioned he's tempted to be, in order to support this principle of separation. In fact, recently, I contacted the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which many of your callers might recognize, listeners, as Ron Reagan's group. And I asked them if I could join and be comfortable as a person of faith, even if my faith is fairly uncertain. Could I identify as Christian and be comfortable in their group, because I believe in the principles that they're setting forward? And I never got any response. So I guess I just summarize by saying I think we need more people of faith and uncertain faith and some faith or some spirituality to step up and support separation of religion, because otherwise we just hear the noisiest voices on the right.
Well, and keep in mind, Madison was an avid churchgoer, and he was freaked out about the possibility that government would corrupt religion, and didn't entirely disagree with Jefferson's fear that religion would corrupt government. He just didn't think it was, he thought our government was far more resilient than that.
And I think Jefferson was reading the Quran, so there was a lot more heterogeneity early on, which has been rejected again by the right.
Yeah.
I think
he would
so much
frequently recite from it.
To be offered by religious people. I have known many people who devoted a lot of their time and efforts based on their spiritual feelings, but at the same time, it can be an evil.
Yeah. It's a great power. That's the thing that I think is so easily missed, is that there is exploiting this core human instinct, much like, the people who make money exploiting sex, for example. It's deep inside us. It's a very powerful thing, and we have to recognize that. And thank you very much for a thoughtful comment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I don't think we can forget that, Christianity was used to justify slavery. It was used to justify the doctrine of discovery, to the exploitation of native people. And welcome back. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
How you doing? I have to agree with your first caller. I think religion's the problem. I would have to paraphrase it as the major organized religions. I don't think it's actually religion, period. And I go back to the Bible, okay? Unlike the pagan religions, which taught you respect for nature and your surroundings, the Bible gave man stewardship over the planet. And that's where the problem is, because that puts us at a higher degree. Instead of being part of something, we're now above it.
So the hierarchical organization of God, man, nature is, that's a good point, Mark. I mean, it's kind of built right into it. And it's patriarchal as well. God as a man and woman as the screw up in the Garden of Eden.
I mean, that's just the way I've looked at it, because if you look at all the pagan religions, what did all of them have in common? Respect for their nature, respect for the planet, for the world they live in. Yeah, totally get it. Mark, thank you. Edward in Long Beach, California. Hey, Edward, what's up?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, I've been observing the Middle East situation between Palestine and Israel. And, there is no Palestine yet, or again, there was a Palestine before 1948. But the Palestinians are there, and I see and hear a lot of predominantly the fundamentalist Christians here in America with a lot of power and money supporting Israel no matter what they do. They're supporting occupation. They're supporting demolishing Palestinian family homes. They're supporting ethnic cleansing of the Christians and Muslims on their own land. And they're suffocating Gaza. There's no food and medicine. There's a blockade. The Israeli military shoots at the fishermen that are fishing off Gaza in the Holy Land. And it's just amazing to me as a Christian that they take the Bible so literally. They think that prophecy has to be fulfilled and over the dead bodies of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's all to bring back Jesus. And why do you want to bring back Jesus? Because then we'll be in charge. It's like,
right.
Then the whole world, every knee shall bow, every voice proclaim, right?
How can they forget what Jesus taught? To treat others as you would want to be treated, and to love your neighbor and love God. I mean, there's Christians and Muslims living there. There are people there in the West Bank, and these the settlers, it's against international law, and for some reason, our government continues to support Israel no matter what they do. And how is that ever going to bring about a peaceful two-state solution with justice? It isn't, because Israel
the Biden administration just last week made an overture toward another overture toward a two-state solution. I think, Trump really set us back a long way. And now I read this morning in, I think it was in the New York Times, that the president of Israel has asked, was it Rivkin, has asked Netanyahu to form a new government. So, we're going to be back with the same right-wing hustler, in my opinion.
Exactly. They keep getting the green light, and they keep taking more land. I mean, they're claiming to want to negotiate over a pizza, but they're eating up all the pizza. They're taking all the land, in other words. It doesn't make sense that they would have any incentive unless we hold the $10 billion that we give them, as collateral for them to get to the negotiating table and talk peace.
Yeah, could be. I think it's only 3, but I may be wrong. Edward, thank you. At least it was 3 when it came out of Camp David. $3 billion to the Egyptians, $3 billion to the Israelis. Let's have peace. We could sure use some peace. We'll be back coming up on 10 minutes before the end. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Frank in Detroit. Hey, Frank, thanks for watching. What's on your mind today?
Hey, well, first of all, let me say I am, without question, not an atheist. Now, I'm a lot of other things, good and bad. But with respect to religion, the last guy who stole part of my thunder, the three most prominent religions, and I'm just picking on them because they've caused the most damage, were used to justify the slave trade, the greatest genocide in human history, recorded history, molestation of children, just all sorts of atrocities that you could possibly think of for centuries. The problem I have with religion is this. At some point, every religion that I've studied requires that the adherent relinquish reason at some point. That's a bad thing. If you just look at the wars that have been started, you look at my ancestry. I have a mixed indigenous and African American background. Look what they did to the American Indians, and it was justified by religion. They're pagan. We don't have to worry about murdering them. The same with slavery. I'll let you go with this. My best friend, may he rest in peace, and I'm from the east side of Detroit. And, he had a saying, there's not much difference between a preacher and a pimp. They're all selling dreams. And when you believe in those dreams, they can be used to justify anything you want.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a reality and a sad one. Frank, thank you. Some really extraordinary perspectives here. Gloria in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gloria, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just calling. I'm a Christian, but I'm not a right wing, and I've always had a big problem with them because they're kind of hijacked our religion. For me, I didn't have this realization that there was these two, probably more, but at least from my perspective, two factions of Christianity. But it was a slow realization for me to realize what was going on with these right-wingers. Anyway, I'm United Methodist. I'm lucky right now. I have a pretty liberal pastor at my church. We're going to split because of the LGBTQ issue, and that's fine with me. But my point is that we can't all quit the church. One of your other callers said he quit. He was so disgusted. And I am, too, with some of the people that I actually attend church with. But we can't all quit because then the right-wingers have the loudest voice in the room. And to me, referring back to Jesus, what he did, he called out the religious leaders, and not that I'm some high-minded person that I can do that, but still, the opposition has to be there to these right-wingers. I was a member of a local peace activist group, and we protested the war in Iraq. And for the life of me, I could not understand why every Christian in the county wasn't at our rallies. And there were honestly a lot of atheists and agnostics that were coming to protest the war too. So, I'm not the kind of person that thinks that you have to belong to a church or anything to be a really good person and a spiritual person. But I still believe that I'm going to keep going to church, and I'm still going to attend Bible studies, and I'm still going to, write letters to the editor, condemning what some of these right-wing Christians are doing. You can't serve two masters. You talked about the evangelicals being so rich. You can't serve God and money. So, all the basic things to me that Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself, all those things are pertinent, and we need to if we claim to be true Christians, we need to keep bringing the basics out. People make everything so complicated, and Jesus, he was a complicated person, but he did say very basic things that gave us a thing to go by to live our lives. So I think we just need to keep saying it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Gloria, and that's why I continue to call myself a Christian, almost in defiance of those people who say, well, you're not a Christian if you don't check these particular boxes. Believe in the resurrection, stuff like that. I'm not, maybe not, but I still consider myself a Christian. I think those teachings are really important, and they're and culturally very important. Thank you, Gloria. Paul in Phoenix. Hey, Paul, what's up? We have about a minute to the end of the hour.
That's plenty of time, Tom. Thank you very much. This is one of my pet peeve topics, and I appreciate you bringing it up. But here's a real life example of something that just happened a couple of weeks ago during the For the People legislation hearing on the Senate floor. Literally, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith from Mississippi pulled out a dollar bill, recited the words, "In God We Trust," and used that as an example to keep African Americans from engaging in their souls to the polls, ritual on Sunday, because, get this, God would be mad because they were doing it on the Sabbath because of something he said in Exodus in the Bible. So because God would be mad, we can't have black people voting on the weekends. She literally said that on the Senate floor during the hearings 2 weeks ago tomorrow.
And it'll probably get her reelected in Louisiana.
Absolutely.
Paul, thank you. Yeah, thank you. A perfect punctuation mark, an exclamation mark to the hour. I appreciate it. We'll continue the conversation on the other side of this break. Plus, I've got to share with you some of the right-wing mythology running around, and we're going to do a somewhat deeper dive too into this whole issue of infrastructure.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft, not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, really big news. We'll continue our conversation about the role of religion and politics in American life. And I know there's a number of you on the phone who want to toss your thoughts in on that, and I'm all for it. But I wanted to bring a few other things into the program as well. We had thought that the Democrats had one chance, for sure, at passing a major piece of legislation through this process called budget reconciliation, which means that it is not subject to a filibuster. It cannot be blocked by the Republican minority in the Senate. We thought that they had one chance at that, and that they used that one chance, or one chance for sure, that they used that one chance with the COVID relief package, the bill that provided us with the checks and extended unemployment insurance and expanded health care. I mean, just did a lot of really great stuff. And there might have been a second opportunity to use reconciliation, because in 2020, you're supposed to be able to do it once a year, and in 2020, Congress never did it. And so apparently, the Republicans were in charge back then, and they got their tax cut out of Trump in 2017. And then basically they just, this is a conversation we had yesterday about Matt Gaetz. What do you do when you're paid $174,000 a year to govern, but you have no interest in governing and you don't believe in government? You get drunk, you take drugs, you have sex, you play golf 1 out of 3 days when you're president. By the way, at this point in time, 4 years ago, we had spent over $1 million on presidential golf trips, almost all of it going to Trump properties. We had not spent one penny for presidential golf trips at this point in time in the Obama presidency or the George W. Bush presidency, and we have not spent one penny on a presidential golf trip in the Biden presidency. It's kind of nice. Things are getting better, it seems. But anyhow, we thought we had this one chance, and maybe we had two chances if we could grab last year's reconciliation and say, we're going to do that this year. Maybe even backdate it. But Chuck Schumer, he's turning out to be a wily old fox. He went to the Senate parliamentarian and said, okay, we passed this piece of legislation by reconciliation. Can we amend it now? Can we simply take the COVID relief package, the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, and put a $2 or $3 trillion amendment on it for, roads and bridges and infrastructure and broadband and everything else, as long as everything in that amendment also meets the criteria for reconciliation. In other words, it has to have something to do with the budget. It has to have something to do with either raising taxes or spending money. And certainly infrastructure is all about both. And the Senate parliamentarian, much to everyone's shock, said, sure, you can do that. And so now the debate is, what do we do? I mean, we've got a between $2 and $3 trillion package right now that has the details of which have been laid out by people like Secretary Buttigieg and Vice President Harris. You've got progressives and many other Democrats who don't even identify themselves as progressives saying, we could do bigger than this, because we're talking about $2 trillion over a 10-year period. That's like $200 million a year, right, if I'm doing my math right. And that's not a hell of a lot of money. If you want to see something really happen, and then the question, of course, becomes also, how do you pay for it? And the Biden administration had initially proposed raising the corporate tax rate, which used to be up at 35%. And that's the top, by the way, that's the top tax bracket. It doesn't mean that every corporation gets taxed, right? The 55 of the 100 largest corporations in America have paid no income taxes in the last 3 years. To get taxed, number one, you have to show a profit. Now, all of those corporations were very, very profitable. And number two, you can't have moved any of that money into some foreign country or shoved it into some kind of loophole category, which they all did. So, now you've got Janet Yellen, our Treasury Secretary, suggesting that we should have a worldwide tax on income, because so many of these large American companies don't just do business in America. I wanted to send a gift to a friend of mine who lives in Germany. I logged on to Amazon.de with my regular Amazon credentials. And, I can read enough German on the screen to be able to buy the product and get it sent right to their family in Germany from the German Amazon website, okay? It's a multinational corporation. But it's based here, it started here, and, well, at the very least, the business it does here should be subject, the profits on the business it does here should be subject to corporate income tax. But then Joe Manchin comes along and says, we can't, it's maybe 25%. I'd take 25%. Keep in mind, it used to be 35%. Trump dropped it down to 21%. And it kind of more or less averaged around 28% over recent years. And so Joe Manchin is like, yeah, 25%. And David Sirota today in his Daily Poster, I think is the name of his newsletter, said, you can track this right to Joe Manchin's major contributors who are in the whole private equity, fiddling with money, hedge fund space, because they're all taking advantage of this particular loophole in Trump's tax bill. Many of them have even changed their form of corporation just so that they could take advantage of that tax loophole. And if you get rid of that tax loophole, they're going to have to spend some money to reinvent themselves all over again. And who wants to do that? So Manchin's trying to blow this up. And he says he's got 5 or 6 colleagues in the Senate, 5 or 6 other Democratic senators who are also taking big money from hedge funds and private equity groups. So that debate is going to happen. But what got real interesting is that debate now does not have to involve Republicans. Up until, this was the critical error in governing that both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama made. Presidents Clinton and Obama both believed, I think believed deep down inside, that for their ideas and legislation to have legitimacy, they had to have bipartisanship. They had to have Republicans sign off on it. And so Obama, for example, made all kinds of tweaks and changes to Obamacare, to his signature product, because Republicans said that was what was necessary to get their votes. They told him, you got to do this and this and that, and then maybe we'll go along with it. And so he did this and this and this. And how many Republican votes did he get? 0. Bill Clinton had the same problem. So the Biden administration has come along and said, yeah, we're all in favor of bipartisanship. We don't want anything. We don't want to do anything in the United States that, doesn't have the support of some Republicans. But they don't have to be in Congress. We'll look at the opinion polls. 80-90% of Americans want our infrastructure rebuilt, and that includes a majority of Republicans. So if the Republicans in Congress say no, screw them. We can do this without them. It's still bipartisan. So Democrats are now negotiating with themselves rather than with Republicans, which is like, praise the Lord, hallelujah, and Baruch Hashem. I mean, it's like finally they figured it out. Republicans have been doing this since the 80s, since the Reagan administration, saying, oh yeah, we'll pass legislation without a single Democratic vote. We don't care. From, some of Reagan's tax cuts and some of his most egregious policies all the way up to Trump's tax cut. So I think it's a new day. Some other things I want to share with you. Children and the new B117 variant. This is huge news. What the right wing is saying about masks, how they're trying to kill more Americans. I'll share that with you. And Joe Biden just made a major announcement about April 19th. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's mixed news, but broadly trending toward good news. I'll share all these details right after the break. And welcome back. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call as usual. Yeah, regarding religion, you don't have to be a religious person to be a good person. Religions are irrational. They're fairy tales. There was a three-piece series on, I think it's on YouTube, it's still available by the BBC and Jonathan Miller, called A Brief History of Disbelief. I don't know if you've seen that, but it basically, it features quotes from famous mathematicians and like Pythagoras, Plutarch, and many others who question the existence of God. And it's a really, really good series, and I recommend any of your viewers to watch it. Also, Bill Maher did a good movie called Religious. I don't know if you've seen that, but these are good exposés of how religions are used by the powerful to manipulate people, and they're based on fallacies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that we could summarize it really simply, Alfredo, by saying that spirituality is an experience, religion is an institution. Does that make sense? And institutions, being human constructs, are always vulnerable. Oh, Alfredo hung up. Are always vulnerable to corruption by humans, and in the context of human foibles. Kusei in Campo, California. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, Kusai.
Kusai. Hey, yes. Kusai, what's up?
I wanted to mention about the religions that the Christianity and the church has been part and parcel of the United States foreign policy for many, many years, as well as the West in general, and it's always used to instigate or start a seed for future involvement in places where they really had no influence. And the other thing is also, this is how the West kind of created a new class of people in the Middle East in the 1800s and created the future leaders of the Middle East, and kind of used the religion itself and the church to further their separation and further their involvement in all kind of things that are happening in the Middle East. For the best example I'll give you is, the turn of the century, in the early 1800s, there was no Christianity in China, and then they sent missionaries, and then back in the 1950s and 1960s, the concern became how to protect the Christians of China who didn't exist 100 or 150 years ago. And I don't think that was happening to save souls. I think that was happening to make sure that we still have a foothold to be involved somewhere. And that the same Christianity is the one that created the new westernized Arabs and North Africans that eventually became the tools of the West to create the havoc that is happening in the Middle East and been happening for the last 100 years or so. And then the last thing...
Yeah, I think Kusai, you're making the same point that the last caller did, that religion is an institution, and whenever you have an institution that is run by people, people will try to use it to their own purposes.
Absolutely, but what I wanted to say is that it's part and parcel of our foreign policy. It's not that we are separating church from anything here.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And selling Yeah, I'm sorry we're out of time, but yes, and selling that foreign policy by pitching it to people who identify as being Christian or Jewish is a whole hell of a lot easier. We'll be right back. On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So Joe Biden is expected to announce today that 150 million Americans have been vaccinated. First dose. That he's on goal to hit 200 million. Keep in mind, there's 340 million of us. 200 million vaccinated by the end of his first 100 days in office. Now, this is not fully vaccinated. It takes a second vaccine. And keep in mind also that, Donald Trump bought 100 million doses of Pfizer, as I recall, of Moderna vaccine, because there was all this stuff going around about how he owned stock in Moderna. And then when he had an opportunity to buy another 100 million doses, he was like, no, we're good. And so Biden had to scramble to get this stuff. It was amazing on the weekend how Jake Tapper, for example, on Sunday was like just twisting himself in a pretzel to try to give some credit to President Trump for Operation Warp Speed that did nothing but basically write a check for 100 million doses of vaccine, and that was it. I mean, the Pfizer vaccine was developed in Germany by a couple of Turkish immigrants, a husband and wife team. So it's like, so Biden inherited a real disaster, a mess, an absolute hot mess. And he's going to make this announcement today that as of April 19th, all Americans should be eligible for the coronavirus. April 19th is like, a week, a little less than 2 weeks away. We have the new Gallup poll, 77% of Americans say the COVID situation is improving. 64% say that it has caused a fair amount of disruption in their lives. And it used to be 49% of Americans were worried about catching COVID. Now that's down to 35%. And that's kind of good news and bad news. It's good news because more and more people are getting vaccinated. I'm seeing more and more people, Louise and I walk for a couple of kilometers every day, and about 2 miles. And we've been seeing more and more people in their 60s, 70s, and older who are out taking a walk and not wearing masks anymore. And these are people who I used to think were mask holes, although typically those were younger people. And now we're seeing older people like venturing out. And I'm guessing it's probably 95% of them are, have had their second vaccine and they're now feeling invincible. So, it's step by step. But then we get Dr. Michael Osterholm, who is the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota. And he's also a member of Joe Biden's COVID-19 Task Force Advisory Board, And on Meet the Press over the weekend, he was interviewed on NBC's program, and he said, please understand this B117 variant is a brand new ballgame. Now, the B117 is the fancy science name for what we call the British variant. It is burning through Europe right now. France is in lockdown. Italy just went into lockdown. Germany is debating it. Large parts of Germany are in lockdown because it's done more on a state-by-state basis there. And it's what's burning through Michigan right now and Massachusetts. It's like, what is it? And Minnesota. What is it with states that start with an M? In Minnesota, Osterholm said more than 740 schools reported cases of the variant. And here's why this is consequential. Down in Florida's Orange County, for example, 1/3 of that county's COVID hospitalizations are people younger than 45. 1/3. And there's an explosion in people, excuse me, I had to sneeze. There's an explosion in people in the 18 to 25 age group in Florida right now with COVID. It's this new variant. As he said, this is a new ballgame, quote, because it infects kids very readily. Unlike previous strains of the virus, where we didn't see children under 8th grade getting infected, now we are. And they're transmitting it to the rest of the community. He says, anywhere you look where you see this emerging, you see that kids are playing a huge role in the transmission of this. All the things that we had planned for kids in schools with this virus are really no longer applicable. We've got to take a whole new look at this issue. And I sure hope that the Biden administration is taking this seriously, because I'm still hearing all this talk about, oh, it's time to open schools. And of course, on the right, it even goes beyond that. This from Dennis Prager yesterday on Town Hall. When I see people walking outside, often alone, wearing a mask, my primary reactions are disappointment and sadness. I never thought most Americans would be governed by irrational fears and unquestioning obedience to authority. Over at the American Thinker, they write, is the mask a means to equalize the West? Liberal activists like Fauci, including those ensconced in the White House, appear to be drunk with power and deliberately moving toward the Chinese social control system that Barack Obama set into motion. Right. Let's all be afraid. Let's be very afraid of wearing masks. It's a sign that we've become Chinese communists. In the midst of this B117 now having established a serious foothold in, at the very least that we know of, in a big way that's showing up epidemiologically in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Massachusetts, and in Florida, and soon to come to a town near you. Now, the B117 is still vulnerable to this vaccine, so we're in a race here between this new variant that's highly contagious and infects children, and they can transmit it to other people around them, including other children, between that virus and the vaccine. And what's standing in the way? Well, in part, you've got a bunch of anti-vaxxers and, right-wing pastors and churches and things. Well, I'll toss this open for conversation.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
On the other side of this break, we'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edward Nell's new book, Progress and Poverty in Economics. The subtitle, Henry George and How Growth in Real Estate Contributes to Inequality and Financial Instability. This is from the introduction, which is subheaded, Reviving the Work of America's Most Original Economist. Andrew Mazzone and I collaborated on a project to review the work of the 19th century American economist Henry George, especially his landmark book, Progress and Poverty, 1879, to see how George's work stood up in the light of modern economics and to determine what could be brought up to date and applied to the contemporary world. We wanted to establish that George's work was relevant and also to criticize American academics, economists for having overlooked or rejected George both in his own time, when his work was a worldwide sensation, and afterward, even today. Andrew died suddenly in the middle of the project. This book is a tribute to him and completes what we began. George began his career as an author and public personality with Progress and Poverty, arguing that progress brought poverty in its wake and that poverty might even outpace progress, an important original point of view that has not lost any of its relevance since George's time. In fact, in our age of burgeoning inequality, it may be more relevant today than ever before. The grounds for this paradoxical interlinking of progress and poverty lay in the effect of rising rents. For George, rents were payment, not for the use of land in the usual sense, for pure access to specific places and locations. But why should some people have the right to limit others' access to the use of the earth? Surely it belongs to us all. Worse, the limiting of access by demanding payment would undermine the benefits of innovation and hard work. To prevent this linking of progress and poverty, George said a major policy shift in taxation was required. This is well known among economists as the Georgist single tax on rents, or the Henry George theorem. Since George's time, there has been progress both in the economy itself and in economic analysis. The economy has been growing, and growth models have become highly sophisticated, in many cases focusing on matters that were central to George a century earlier. But that progress has also led to poverty, obvious in the economy itself. Our mainstream economics is also poverty-ridden, stricken. Our analytical models do not explain the persistence of poverty very well, nor do they account for crises and crashes, let alone the recent and stubborn growth of inequality. The mainstream theory of income distribution, marginal productivity, which assumes diminishing returns for all these factors of production and the markets will coordinate their adjustment. Distribution is hopelessly flawed. George rightly rejected an early version of it. And contemporary economic theory has almost completely lost sight of rents and real estate, even though real estate was center stage in the global financial crisis of 2008, a crisis directly resulting from speculation in the housing market. And in 2016, Donald Trump, a real estate developer whose rise to power is intimately linked to rents and real estate speculation, was elected president. With a solid Republican majority in Congress, he began to implement a set of relentlessly regressive trickle-down economic policies that can be expected to lead to more poverty among vast segments of the population. Andrew and I wanted to find insights and tools in George's thought to counter this trend, to support progress and alleviate poverty. Before Andrew died, we had settled on 5 main points in George's writing that we wanted particularly to explore. 1, George emphasized cooperation as well as competition in regard to increasing productivity. He saw that the division of labor and cooperation as settlements developed on new land created value in location and generated increases in output, while bringing about innovation. This is what generated the differentials on which rent is based, as we will explain. Number 2, George and his followers claimed that the total value of land in a region would tend to equal the value of the aggregate output of that region. 3, further, they claimed that total rents would tend to equal the costs of government, so that taxing rents would pay for government. And number 4, they contended that unless prevented by an activist government, inequality in wealth and income, roughly between the upper and lower classes, but also between other significant groups, would tend to rise inexorably. And number 5, and finally, George repeatedly attacked land speculation and its tendency to withdraw land from productive use and to promote concentration, a point that seemed to both Andrew and myself to have a direct bearing on today's world. Only today it's not land alone, but finance generally that is subject to speculative excesses. I wrote up notes on theory while Andrew worked on rents, cost of government, land values, and GNP. I eventually put our notes together into 2 more or less finished articles to present at the annual conference of the Eastern Economics Association in New York City. Economists have given George short shrift, which is a shameful oversight. He has much to teach us. He was uniquely American, perhaps our greatest economist, certainly our most original. He is justly famous and heralded in the 19th century, and his book Progress and Poverty, which is the source for much of our analysis on these pages, was the best-selling book on economics of that entire century. The book Progress and Poverty in Economics by Edward Nell.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Anna in Los Angeles. Hey, Anna, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. To your point of evangelism is the route to sway people from getting the vax and thus costing lives. My point in calling, and I do respect your opinion, is that the Nuremberg Code was signed to ensure the fundamental right of informed consent. And whether you have the right to choose your jab and I have the right to not doesn't make me a right-wing Confederate flag person. The big pharma went to the Congress in the 80s to say, hey, we're getting sued too much. It's breaking our piggy bank. So they have no liability. The taxpayers pay for their research. They get to receive all the profit.
I understand all that, Anna, and we've discussed that before on this program. None of that speaks to the issue of we are engaged in a massive science experiment here. We've got a virus that the human race in the 300,000 years we've been on this planet has never before encountered. That experimental virus, as it were, is ripping through our population. We've got and it's killed 500,000 Americans and several million people around the planet, and it has sickened and disabled tens of millions of Americans. And we now have a vaccine that we know has at least with about a 3 or 4 month event horizon. And again, I'll give this to you. With Jerry Ford with his swine flu vaccine, it wasn't until 6 months or a year later that we discovered Guillain-Barré, I think it's called, syndrome. But it was very, very rare. But that was against the flu, which was not killing people like this thing kills people. So we've got a vaccine that is working. I'm not even going to say seems to work. The science is solid on this, Anna. I don't understand how you would refuse to take the vaccine, particularly out of some ideology that has to do with the Nuremberg trials?
Because I have the right to informed consent, and there's not enough information or long-term studies that says that myself or my children are not going to have long-term effects. People have died.
Well, I can tell you right now that getting the virus is going to have a long-term effect. Don't your children have the right not to be disabled by this virus? Don't your friends and neighbors and relatives have the right not to be disabled by you because you're just engaging in this thought experiment?
I mean, it's amazing. And again, you're the one that has the microphone, and I respect that. But we're going to see in 10 months whether there's side effects on our next generation. We don't know what gene therapy is going to do to our
This is
genes.
not gene therapy, Anna. This is not altering your genes. You've been listening to BS on the internet. No, you can find websites that'll tell you that the world is flat. You can find websites that will tell you that Bill Clinton is a lizard person and zips on his human suit every day. And you can find sites that'll tell you that mRNA vaccines are gene therapy. They're not. This is not gene therapy. This is a vaccine that is producing antibodies in your body to proteins specific to this virus. That's all it is.
Tom, the manufacturers say this is up to 50% of lessening your symptoms. It's not going to stop you from catching it.
No, I'm sorry, Anna. I'm going to stop you right now because you've been, this is such a tragedy. When people who, clearly have a functioning intellect get sucked into these conspiracy theories. And I can tell you, some of this stuff is being pushed in America, particularly in social media like on Facebook, by foreign countries that want to see the United States crash and burn. And then you've got, crazies and zealots and conspiracy nuts and everything else. And some decent people get sucked up into this. And it's just so very sad. It's so very unfortunate. Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. So many things, but let me just say that it was white colonizers that were upset and disappointed with their church in Europe that felt the need to take their ideals and mix it with a little bit of racism when they came over here and murdered all the natives.
Well, they were upset with their government in Europe, which was trying to suppress their church, and so they came over here and said, well, we'll just take over the government, and which they did in the state of Massachusetts right up until 1778.
Yes, and I am a very proud, educated atheist. I was born and raised Southern Baptist with my family, and found that very disingenuous. Don't appreciate going to a Southern Baptist church, being felt like the preacher's been a little bit racist to me. I just don't like that.
Well,
they didn't like
the Southern Baptist
family.
Church has become the white church, basically.
Yeah, they were very upset. The preachers were very upset at my local church here in Georgia that we were a mixed family. That upset them greatly, and they made a point to call it out in the middle of the congregation.
Oh, my
So, yeah, proud atheist here. And let me just say that I've been on Facebook forever, and I'm on some atheist pages, and I'm used to Trump supporters coming on these atheist pages spouting their evangelical beliefs. However, now that Trump has definitely lost, these Trump supporters that you can go back 5 months ago on their Facebook and see how evangelical they are suddenly atheists.
Really? I wonder how many of those are just trolls. They're just, Facebook a couple of months ago said that they deleted 1 billion, if I'm remembering this correctly. I mean, it's hard to imagine that it could have been that many. Maybe I read it wrong, but it just deleted some massive number of phony accounts.
That was Trump paying Facebook $1 billion for a misinformation campaign, right?
I don't. I shouldn't quote numbers without the statistics right in front of me. So, but take it with a grain of salt. But they did say that they deleted some incredible, massive number. So anyway, I've got to move along here, Susan. But thank you very much for the call and spot on. Lynn in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I consider myself Jewish by birth and spiritual by inclination, and I agree with totally what you said. I mean, I agree that God is energy, everything is energy and all that kind of stuff. And, I just agree with what you said because it just seems that, and I'm also a blind individual too, but, I think that I have been an explorer all my life about various faiths and religions and stuff like that, mostly Jewish, and I have learned about Judaism because I didn't know anything. We grew up secular Judaism. And, I'm not crazy about the state of Israel either, and I support Palestinian rights. And I think it's just tough for some of this. And in the blind community, there are so many Christians, it's hard to be Jewish because people just spout their, church, prayer, Christian beliefs, and it drives me crazy sometimes because, I remind my son that Jews are only 2% of the world's population. But, I think the whole idea of people proselytizing, and luckily Jews do not proselytize, in terms of what they do and how they use dominance to purvey their religions is a really sad thing, and that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I'm with you. And there was a time in my life when I was absolutely fascinated by Judaism. I'm still convinced that my grandmother, my father's mother, was Jewish, and we've not been able to find one way or the other. But and I was just it was extraordinary to me to discover how when I talked to rabbis about this, they were like, come back when you really want to make some kind of a commitment, because we're really not interested in proselytizing you. Do you think, Lynn, that which I admired, do you think that the blind community, I know some other disability communities have been particular victims or targets for evangelicals for evangelism. Is that the case with the blind community?
I think so, because, again, it's a sense of belonging and community. Even though the churches and the synagogues don't really treat blind people very well a lot of times. I just moved to Olympia a year ago in Washington, a little more than a year ago. I've lived in about 6 states. So, my son lives in the area. That's why I'm here. But, I think so. I think they're easy fodder. They're depressed. They're whatever. And so it's an easy target.
Vulnerable. Yeah. I get it. Lynn, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for multiple perspectives that you brought to this program and to our conversation. It's much appreciated. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And just a reminder, in about 5 minutes, we're going to check in with Debbie Hines and find out what happened in the Derek Chauvin trial for his murder of George Floyd. And welcome back. Mark in Oakland, California. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Thank you. Hi, Tom. So many great points about religion and spirituality, so I wanted to weigh in. Absolutely religion, Western religion, modern religions, for a long time, it's been a vessel for elitism and exceptionalism and racism. And I've always leaned more towards spirituality as opposed to organized religion. I was raised in a family with a lot of, various histories. There's, Jewish and Russian Jewish influences and Protestant history and, Italian Catholics in my family. So it was a mixed bag. And my parents raised my brothers and I to say, these are decisions you'll make when you're old enough to understand them. And, a couple of anecdotes. I had a time when I was working with a guy who had been brought up in a Southern Baptist tradition, very, very involved in the church, running Bible study classes and really, kind of a star in the church. And he started to come up with an idea that he wanted to publish a kind of interfaith newsletter and just exchange ideas. And, the fathers of his church, took him aside and said, "You're being led down the wrong path. This is evil." And he had a real crisis in faith. And then, many years later, when I met him and we talked about our beliefs, we found that we almost had the same exact, fundamental beliefs in our heart. Him coming from an extremely structured religious background, and me having no structure at all. And fast forward to just recently, when my son is completing his Eagle Scout requirement for Boy Scouts, and we live in Oakland. It's a very diverse culture. We know about all of the controversy around the Boy Scouts and all, but it was a good experience for him. We had a very progressive troop and leadership, but one of the requirements for the Boy Scouts is you do have to state your kind of alignment with a specific, with some organized religion. And since we hadn't, we had to kind of cast around for that. Now, I came to Theravada Buddhism through therapy, and it changed my life. But as we looked at things, we kind of gravitated towards and read a little bit about Unitarian Universalist, which is a great approach that says, forget the dogma, forget the doctrine, be a good person, challenge your beliefs, and if you challenge them and they don't stand up, then it's okay to change your beliefs, and just show respect for everyone and everything, which is very tightly in line with a lot of Buddhist philosophy and thought. It just continues to reinforce that it's about spirituality and not some human patina that you put on it to try and use it as either it's not the opiate of the masses. It's a cudgel for those in control. And my last thought is. Go ahead.
No, we have about 15 seconds, real quick.
Okay. Where did Jesus come up with all of these crazy ideas that he brought to the foundation of Christianity? He got it right across the desert. He studied Buddhism and brought it back.
Yeah, there is some evidence of that.
That's a controversy, but I really think that's the most logical answer.
And possibly Hinduism as well. Yeah, thank you, Mark. But see, there's also religions that preceded even Judaism, Zoroastrianism and things like that have a lot of the elements that have been incorporated into Christianity. It's a fascinating conversation. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Debbie Hines right after the break. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. Check in with Debbie Hines and find out what's going on in the Chauvin trial today. Debbie, trial lawyer, political commentator, former prosecutor, the Assistant Attorney General of Maryland early in her career. IamDebbieHines.com is both her .com is her website, and IamDebbieHines is her Twitter handle. Debbie, welcome back. What happened today?
Thank you. So I think today we're actually starting to see where the prosecution is going. And what we're seeing is that they are putting on all of these Minneapolis police officer witnesses to testify that, Chauvin used unreasonable force. He wasn't trained to use that neck restraint that he used. One of the witnesses even said, they never even saw that maneuver that he used with Mr. Floyd's neck being held down with Chauvin's knee for 9 minutes. And that Chauvin had a duty to de-escalate the situation. Obviously, it was under control within a matter of a couple of seconds, so to speak, or at the very longest, a couple of minutes, and that he had a duty as a police officer to regard the sanctity of life. So we're seeing not just from previously Lieutenant Zimmerman, the oldest serving police officer currently in the Minneapolis Police Force, to the police chief yesterday, to the two trainers today, and another officer who said, yes, and we do training, so he cannot blame it on the police force. So they're just really building a very compelling case so far on the use of unreasonable force, which is what they have to, which is one of the aspects that they have to show.
So in the spirit of the notion that all they need is one wackadoodle juror to blow this case up with a hung jury, as I believe you explained to us yesterday. Are the outlines of the defense becoming clear as a result of the cross-examination of the prosecution witnesses? And do we know when the defense is going to begin their case and who their witnesses are going to be, where they're going to go?
We don't know when the defense is going to present their case. The judge is keeping everything under wraps with that, and that's a very good sign, because there's no reason for the witnesses on either side to be bombarded with the media and the press with questions before they testify. So we're not going to know when the defense is going to start and who the defense witnesses are going to be, and that has been the ruling throughout, just to keep some order and to hopefully not have a mistrial, because you can also have a mistrial in that way. But the defense is, they're harping on the things they've harped on before, that the crowd was a distraction, which has been refuted by the prosecution, and the police officer is supposed to be able to, work with the crowd, and obviously this crowd was not a distraction. But they keep showing the defense, they keep showing a picture, the photo, the video, to show that there are different angles in the photo that would tend to suggest that Chauvin's knee was not on Mr. Floyd's neck, but was on his shoulder. That's some red herring that they're coming up with. It's not going to probably fly because we've already had the witnesses who were there. And everybody knows that if you take enough selfies, you can get the best possible look for yourself that you want. May not be what you look like in real life. So that's all that they're trying to really do, is show that. But I think that, and then the other thing they're working on is the totality of the circumstances, that yes, these are the policies, but things can change. Things can change on a moment's notice when you're policing, and I don't see that going anywhere. I think that their biggest shot, which is yet to come, is really dealing with the issue of causation, and that was sort of touched on today because they really want the witness that was in Mr. Floyd's car, who is an individual that the girl could have testified had given them drugs previously. They really want that person to testify as to what was Mr. Floyd's condition when he went back into the car, and to get into the whole issue of, drug dealing.
Debbie Hines, we have about a minute and a half left. Tell us what happened with this guy who was in the car with George Floyd. I think he's been kind of characterized as basically a local drug dealer, if I'm recalling that correctly.
Right, and Courtney Voss, who's George Floyd's girlfriend, she did testify about him, and they've already brought that out, that, they did use drugs together, they tried to get over their opioid addiction, and sometimes they purchased drugs from this individual who just happened to be in the car on May 25th, 2020, with George Floyd. But that's just really on the defensive part, to try to get in the whole concept that Mr. Floyd did not die because he was held down with the knee, full weight of someone's knee on his neck for over 9 minutes, but it had something to do with the drugs, and the drugs in his system caused the heart attack. So at the end of the day, the witness that the defense would like to call is going to, his attorney has said he's going to take the Fifth Amendment, because he sees where this thing is going to, that they're going to try to blame George Floyd's death on him.
Right. So was he successful in requesting immunity?
Well, he doesn't get immunity. He just gets, because the prosecution doesn't want him. He doesn't get immunity. He's just saying he's going to take the Fifth, meaning you can ask me everything you want to ask me. I'm going to give you my name and my address and end it there.
I thought they were arguing for immunity. I must have misunderstood. Debbie Hines, Yeah, okay. I so appreciate your perspective and your experience on this, and your willingness to come on and share with us. Thank you so much for these updates.
Thank you.
Debbie, great speaking with you. Debbie Hines, IamDebbieHines.com, I am Debbie Hines on Twitter. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, let's have some fun. It's science. It's also, the middle of spring. I guess early on in spring, but we're heading towards summer, and summer, at least here on the West Coast, is fire season increasingly. Last year we had a week or so where even in our house, as buttoned up as we could make it with 2 air filters running full time, Louise and I were in pain, could not breathe. It's just like, what is going on? So I thought, well, let's ask one of the world's most prominent climate scientists about that. He happens to be a good guy and a friend and a friend of our program, Dr. Michael Mann, the Distinguished Professor of Meteorology, the Director of the Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State University, member of the National Academy of Sciences, recipient of the Tyler Prize, the author of numerous books, including his most recent, The Madhouse Effect. His most recent is The New Climate Wars. Michael Mann with 2Ns.net is his website, and you can tweet him at Michael E. Mann with 2 Ns. Dr. Mann, welcome back. What is going on with the West megadrought? First of all, what is a megadrought, and what is the situation in the West? And welcome back.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks. It's good to be with you, my friend. And we are going into summer now. We're seeing that same sort of onslaught of extreme weather events that we've come now to expect every summer. And the West Coast, of course, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, last year had an epic wildfire season. And in fact, California, to some extent, we don't even refer to it as having a fire season anymore, because you can see major wildfires now break out any time of the year. And in fact, some of the worst wildfires have happened in December. So there is now a perpetual fire season as California gets drier, as it gets warmer. And it's not rocket science. You take drought, you take heat, you put them together, you get these epic wildfires like we've seen here in the United States, in the western U.S., or a year ago when I was on sabbatical in Sydney. And bushfires were literally blanketing the entire continent of Australia. This is the face of climate change. It's not distant. It's not off in our future. It's here, and it's now, and it's impacting us today.
Now, we know that there have been, throughout known human history, in the last 10, 20,000 years, I'd say 10 or fewer thousand years. But in any case, we know that there have been periods of sustained drought. We've found abandoned cities in the Pacific, in the southwestern United States, for example, that go back before Columbus, where there was apparently a big drought 800-900 years ago, and it just wiped out some smaller civilizations or tribes, communities. How does that play into this? That's the excuse that's always thrown out by the climate deniers. Oh, yeah, we've always had these kind of things going on. How does that play into this? Or is this completely disconnected from the phenomena that produced that? I mean, how do we differentiate and talk about scale here, please?
Yeah, and there is a connection. I mean, there are sort of natural events in the past where we have seen extreme weather associated with natural climate variability. About 1,000 years ago, the Western U.S. was fairly dry. We think the tropical Pacific was sort of stuck almost in the La Nina state. You have El Nino events and you have La Nina events. El Nino years are often very wet years for large parts of California. La Nina years are often the opposite, drier in the Western U.S. And we think that conditions about 1,000 years ago were sort of stuck almost in that La Nina state, which does lead to drier conditions in the West. Here today, we've got a double whammy. We've got, and let's provide some perspective. Yes, there were natural droughts in the past. Megadrought is just a very large, extended drought, and there was a megadrought in the Western U.S. About 1,000 years. But the tree ring experts who reconstruct past drought events and can compare them with today have found that the drought that we've seen in California over the last decade is the worst on record, as far back as they can go, at least 1,200 years. And so the drought we're now facing, the dryness we're now facing, is outside of the range of the natural variability that we've seen over the past 1,000 years. And in this case, it's sort of a double whammy. Climate change, in a sense, might be pushing us towards a state that's sort of like that La Nina state in the tropical Pacific that leads to worse drought in California. But that's on top of an overall warming and drying associated with climate change. So climate change might be giving us a double whammy that means even drier conditions out west than our climate models have predicted. Another example of where uncertainty isn't our friend. In some respects, the changes that we're seeing are greater and are happening faster than our climate models predicted.
Yeah, not good news. We're talking with Dr. Michael Mann, his most recent book, The New Climate Wars. michaelmann.net, his website, and Michael E. Mann on Twitter. Dr. Mann, the source of this, the cause of all this, there's an absolute scientific consensus that it has to do with burning fossil fuels, and it's exacerbated by a few other chemicals, but principally carbon-based fuels. As a climate scientist, when you look at some of the proposals that are being put forward right now by the Biden administration for rebuilding American infrastructure, given that about half of all our carbon emissions in this country come from cars, about another quarter of them from houses, please correct me if I have any of those numbers wrong, not just houses and buildings, let's say, are we going in the right direction? Are we doing anything close to enough? Do you have thoughts on this, in the context of science as opposed to politics?
Yeah, and so what the science tells us is that it is still possible to avert the worst impacts of climate change. We are not going to avert all damaging and dangerous climate change impacts because they're already here. On the West Coast, they're here. If you're Puerto Rico, they're here. The Gulf Coast that had a record hurricane season last year, Australia, where I was on sabbatical a year ago, all around the world, we are seeing dangerous climate change impacts. And so that's already baked in. The question is, how bad are we willing to let it get? And if we act boldly and dramatically, and we bring carbon emissions down by a factor of 2 within the next decade, which is doable with the right incentives, we can avert the worst impacts of climate change. Now, the Biden plan is a bold plan. It's the boldest plan that we've seen by any American president so far, even more so than Barack Obama. And it comes about as close as you can come to what we might think of as the Green New Deal through executive actions alone. And obviously, to really implement a Green New Deal, we're going to need legislation. And so here, the good news is we've got an executive branch that's acting, that's come forward with a bold range of proposals that really does address those carbon emissions you're talking about. 70% of our carbon emissions comes from the burning of fossil fuels for energy, for transportation, for buildings. And these proposals really address that. And they also address carbon emissions in the land use sector, in the forestry sector, in the agriculture sector. So it's really a cross-government approach, and it's a bold approach. But we need to codify that in legislation because we've learned that, live by executive actions, die by executive actions. Anything that is passed by this administration could be undone by the next administration if they're no longer as climate friendly if instead we get another administration like the Trump administration that's simply doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. We need to make sure we get legislation that really codifies policies that incentivize renewable energy, provide subsidies for renewable energy, block new fossil fuel infrastructure, carbon pricing that's done in a just manner. That is progressive rather than regressive is one of the approaches that I think is important too.
This is great stuff. Dr. Michael Mann, thank you so much for dropping by and informing us all today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, indeed. It truly is. It's great talking with you, and I know that the people who are listening value this information. Important stuff. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here. I'll be right back with you right after this. And welcome back. I'm trying to see who's been on hold here for a really long time. And there we go. Roger in Indianapolis. Hey, Roger. Thank you for waiting as long as you have. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Brother Tom, appreciate you. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in on this religious thing. I was raised in the United Church of Christ. I had to learn the catechism. They pounded it in my head before I could get baptized, and I can recite today the Apostles' Creed. My opinion is that the Bible could be reduced to one page. The first item on that page would be the Golden Rule. And for those who want to tap dance around that one, the PS would be, if you didn't get that, here's the 10 Commandments, and that would be all that would be necessary. And that's my input for the day. Thank you. I appreciate all you do.
Well, thank you, Roger. Don't you think that Matthew 25 and the Sermon on the Mount might even be more important than the 10 Commandments?
I suppose. I haven't given that much thought. These were the things that I landed on coming out of my religious upbringing, and then going through my 69 years of exploration with Buddhism and all the other things that I've looked into. So, I think that's a very appropriate addition. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Nice to hear from you. Sue in Minneapolis. Hey, Sue. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
So I wanted to talk to you about what one of your previous callers had said about Jesus possibly having brought some Eastern thought, such as Buddhist and Hindu teachings, from South Asia. And I just wanted to mention there's a place called, there's a shrine in North India where some people claim Jesus died there. And not everyone. Pardon?
I've read about it. I'm familiar with this. I've not been there, but I've read about this. That the people who live there have this tradition that goes back 2,000 years, saying that this guy was here. He came from Israel.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Not everybody is crazy about that idea. Some people think that it's blasphemous, and some people believe that. Really do believe that he died there. And I also wanted to mention that this concept that is now being discussed more and is getting more social attention about, colonialism and ownership of different kinds of thoughts and beliefs and practices. I just wanted to mention something about that because the previous caller had said something about Christianity being used to control and work hand in hand with eradicating cultures and taking over resources of people. And so I just wanted to mention that I think a lot of this is happening with people using these concepts and not fighting them in places like medicine and education, where they're using good Hispaniola practices, and they're just...
I completely get it. Sue, I'm sorry we're out of time, but yes, people take these things out of context, I think is what you're saying. Yes, thank you. Well said. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Tom in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Tom, what's on your mind today?
Oh, well, I've been really enjoying the discussion on religion, and I wanted to kind of underscore how, particularly Christianity, because that seems what we're mostly talking about. But I wanted to underscore my life experience and how religion can be a force for good and enlightenment, and also a force for oppression. And years ago, 1988 to be exact, I spent some time in Guatemala traveling. And as you probably know, in Central America, all through the Americas, the Indians practice an amalgam of Catholicism and their own spirituality. If you've never visited one of those churches, it's a fascinating thing to see. Well, along about the early 80s, a guy called Rios Montt, a military guy, took over in a coup. And, of course, he was praised by the international community. He had the backing of the U.S. and all that. And he ran afoul of the church down there, the Catholic Church, because of his treatment. He was very oppressive, and, well, he killed people, and tortured them. And he ran afoul of the church and became a fundamentalist. And I believe he may become a minister. But he was buddies with Falwell and all those guys you were talking about earlier. And what he did, by the time I was there in 88, he brought all these clowns, I call them, missionaries in to proselytize and try to convert people. And basically what it was driving a wedge, in the indigenous community. And it was sad. It was heartbreaking to see. People had signs in their window where Catholics leave us alone. And you can kind of see the parallel to what's happened here, with the fundamentalists. It's, in other words, don't worry about that you're poor and don't have 3 meals a day and no clean water, but God will reward you, if you just shut up and
right.
Whereas at that time the Catholic Church
work in the sugar cane fields.
The Catholic Church was practicing a lot of liberation theology, and they were trying to liberate people in this world. But on the other hand, more recently, I live here in New Mexico, about 120 miles north of here. There's this wonderful Benedictine monastery that's called Christ in the Desert. My wife and I, neither of us practice religion. We try to visit there once a year. We haven't been able to go because of COVID. And it's the opposite side of the coin, Tom. It's it's not enough to make you convert necessarily, but to watch these people, these monks, they live by example. They live a simple life. Right? They work. They welcome. Everybody's welcome. That is St. Benedict's creed, is that anybody who shows up is welcome as if he or she were Christ himself.
Yeah, welcome the stranger.
You know what I'm saying? Pardon?
Yeah. I said, welcome the stranger, right out of Matthew. Actually, it's Matthew 25, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're more verse in the Bible. But when you visit, I mean, all you're asked to do is observe a certain amount of silence. You don't have to go to the services. You don't have to, but you can help out. And you can, in other words, it's a couple of days of peace, quiet, spirituality. And I just think that's much more powerful to see people leading by example than by.
I agree, and it's why when I say, I've been saying for some time, I think churches should be taxed because they use our resources just like everything else. The exception that I make to that are monasteries because they don't necessarily have a means to produce the money to pay the tax, whereas churches do.
Yeah.
But you know, and taxing churches would not hurt small churches because if you don't show a quote profit, then you don't have to pay a tax. We're talking income taxes here, although I suppose property taxes might hit them. But you know, Tom, along those same lines, I recall back. I wrote about this actually in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, which I wrote in the '90s. I had been on the mailing list of a bunch of religious organizations and churches, you know, left over from my days. Being a real religious seeker back in the 70s. And I got this unsolicited in the mail, this magazine called Brown Gold from this group called New Tribes Mission. They're still around. They got a website. And it was just heartbreaking to read the letters from these missionaries in the field that were being funded by the people who got this magazine. They would talk about how, you know, my wife and I are missionaries to the, you know, some unsayable name of a tribe, you know, unpronounceable tribe down in the Brazilian Amazon. And we're having such a problem convincing these people that they're all sinners because they're all happy and they seem to have a good life. But we're trying really hard to convince them that they're sinners and they need Jesus to resolve their sin. But they're not buying it. Please pray that they will be convicted in the Spirit and realize, you know, their own sinfulness. You know, they run around without clothes sometimes, and oh my God! And I'm reading this magazine thinking this is friggin' cultural genocide being paid for by probably well-intentioned, but you know how you could read this and not see what it is. People all over the country. It's just mind-boggling. Tom, thanks for the story. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. There's so much, you know, there can be so much good coming out of religion, and I think that we're seeing kind of a small mini Reformation now with Francis and the Catholic Church, and so much evil has come out of religion over the years. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And it's not unique to any one particular religion, although some seem to be more problematic than others at different stages in their development. But it's an institution.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists Suckered Millions Out of Their Homes and Demolished the American Dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed. because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwarzman's 60th. There were some differences, though, she wrote. Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon. Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz.
On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Pfizer just came out with a 6-month update. We are 6 months into the Pfizer vaccine being in use in the world. I realize it's April, but from the beginning of their clinical trials to today. And what they found is that they had, among the placebo group, this is a group of 46,307 people. What they found was that among the placebo group, 32 people got hospitalized with COVID. The number of people who were hospitalized with COVID among those who had the Pfizer vaccine 6 months ago, 0. Also in South Africa, where the B1351 strain, the one that is killing young people, and I think is going to be the fifth wave after the British variant in many parts of the world, they had the N number is smaller. It's 800. The number of people that they did this test with over a 6-month period, but the number of cases among the vaccinated who ended up hospitalized in South Africa as a result of and had taken the Pfizer vaccine and then in the real world were exposed to the virus. The number of people, and now there were 9 people out of that placebo group, a little more than 1% who ended up hospitalized among the people who got the placebo, who did not get the vaccine. But among the people who got the vaccine, the number who were hospitalized, 0. It looks like this vaccine is a real, knock it out of the ballpark thing. So, good news. Good news. Michael in Memphis, Tennessee. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just wanted to touch on your religion topic. Mm-hmm. Being from Memphis, like I told you, we have churches on every corner here, literally. And when you say that you're a Christian, and I had this conversation with somebody, he said, man, I'm a believer. I don't call myself a Christian, but listening to his point and looking at where we are, I'm black, and I live in Memphis, Tennessee. And as you know, the Klan wasn't founded too far from here. Nathan Bedford Forrest had a statue here. He has a park here. And when you look at, I'm a Christian, and a lot of horrible things have been done in the name of Christianity. Manifest Destiny was done in the name of Christianity. It was mass murder. I agree. Slavery in the name of Christianity. Yep. And people, when you have these conversations, and I tell people at work, Mike, look, we don't need to have this conversation here because you're inevitably going to say something stupid or, well, slavery wasn't as bad as you think, because I'm a Christian and I don't want to hear that. And those are reasons why you have people that say, I'm an atheist, because if the God you serve believes in the crap that you walking around with, I guarantee you 90% of those idiots that was in Washington and did what they did at the Capitol building, I guarantee you 90% of them swerving down the Christians.
Yeah, probably 98%.
Beat cops, maced them. Yeah, 98%. They beat cops, maced them, you name it. They're Christians. And when you look at it, and when people have conversations like that about religion, you turn people off. And I had this conversation with people at my church. Again, Southern Baptist. The only things they care about at my church is abortion and homosexuality. Those are the only things they talk about. I'm like, okay, so I can beat my wife, cheat on her, have a baby with the mistress. As long as we don't abort that baby, I can still be a deacon, right? And they all look at me funny. I'm like, well, this is what people get from you, because that's all you talk about. If you're gay, you're going to hell. If you have an abortion, you're going to hell. Well, what about if you cheat on your wife? What about you beat the crap?
No, I totally get it, and I completely agree with you, Michael, and that's why that's why I say that I'm a Christian, because I think it's important for us to reclaim and reinvent that word, because it ain't going away. But I'll be right up front about what that means to me, and it means something very different to me than it does to a lot of other Christians. Anyhow, Michael, I want to tell you that you are the winner of the day, the EasyFlow Personal Air Filtration System, fresh air anywhere. More information available at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. I'm going to put you on hold, Michael, and Joyce is going to pick up your call on line 5, and we'll get you one of these contraptions. They're just amazing. Anyhow, little David in Dallas, Texas. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I love your show. I wanted to touch on the topic of climate change and your discussion with Dr. Mann. It's great. I agree. But there is another your climate change. Industrial farming.
David, I don't know what you're doing, but you've got some kind of wind going by you that is making it almost impossible to hear you. If you could just stop and turn around and just talk to me, please.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there is another major cause of climate change, from my understanding, and that is industrial farming of animals. And
absolutely true.
I never hear that brought up. I only hear carbon emissions, but methane is a huge problem, and if we don't do something about that, it's going to be really bad. So I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
I'm absolutely with you, and that wind is back, David. David, thanks for the call and for bringing up an important topic. Not only is our factory farming producing food, in this case meat in quotes, that is arguably not good for you and less nutritious than it used to be, as it were, assuming that you humans have eaten animals for most of our history. I don't think you can completely discount that, but and I've said before, Louise and I occasionally eat fish. But all that said, we have turned growing animals into just another industry, just another mechanized industrial process, and we are using everything from genetically modified organisms, principally soybeans, that are GMO soybeans, to feed them. We're feeding these animals food that they were never designed to eat. They're designed to eat grass, and instead we're feeding them grains, and those grains are causing them to have produce massive amounts of methane. It makes them fatter faster also, which changes their microbiome, which causes you to think, okay, gee, if we're picking up any of the bacteria that's coming off those animals, what's that doing to our microbiomes? I mean, if it's making them fatter, we know that there are some bacteria in the gut that actually, those particular bacterial profiles are characteristic of people who are clinically obese, that are not characteristic of people who are not obese. And did that stuff develop in animal agriculture? I mean, it's just like there's so many, not to mention cruelty. And, there's health issues, there's environmental issues. It's like we need to have a serious conversation in this country, a re-examination, a re-evaluation, whatever you want to call it, of animal agriculture. It's just, what's going on is just nuts. So I'll just leave it at that. Janet in no wishy-washy here. Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington, you're on the air, Janet.
Your rant just then, your mini rant about industrial farming, and I agree with you. I've heard it said that they will look back on this time as it being like I don't know, almost like a holocaust of animals. Like they'll look back in horror. I mean,
yes,
so
I agree.
I agree. Speaking of horrors, I wanted to call about, and I've been debating about this for weeks and weeks. I'm waiting for Friday, but you're talking about religion, and I wanted to just mention the death cult of religions, and that would be the Pentecostal church. And I was raised in that church until I was about 10. It scared me so bad. I would not go to church for years, and I realized that there are lots and lots of religions that do great things. Unfortunately, that was not the experience I had. I just had one of being terrified. I have a sister who's still a member of this church. She's gone down this rabbit hole has been, called me in the 80s, crying and weeping, telling me that, the world was going to end, and she was so sorry for everything she'd done to me in my life, and blah, blah, blah. And, of course, it didn't happen. It was just some crazy pastor. But, they're waiting for the rapture. That is what they're doing. That's why all this move around Jerusalem. And I wish that someone who had gotten away from this church, who attended it far longer than I have, my condolences to them, but that they, could call in with even more information. But the last call that I had with my sister, which was a couple of months ago, she was like, well, I think we're going to come upon hard times. And I can't remember if this was before or after the insurrection at the Capitol that happened, but I feel like this is, when Chris Hedges refers to white Christian nationals, I feel like this particular group is what he is referring to. And also, I would like to give a shout-out to someone who used to be a pastor for this church. His name is Carlton Shields. And if you listen to something on This American Life called The Heretic, he explains why he left that church. And it truly is amazing. And they also, this is a rapidly growing religion with Hispanics, and it's very led by males, very patrimony. So I hope someone else will call in to explain a little further, because it's a very scary religion.
Yeah, the Catholic tainted Pentecostalism. And, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with this, Janet. As a teenager, I attended the North Lansing Church of God briefly, and it was speaking in tongues and slaying in the Spirit. All this stuff. It's amazing.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So, been there, seen that, and escaped it. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Mary in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi. I was listening to all this with the spiritual stuff. I grew up as a Unitarian at the age of 10, and so a lot of this stuff was very different from what I grew up with, as far as it wasn't religion. It wasn't any of the things you're talking about. Unitarians started out like in the 1500s, and they came over, and a lot of our early people in the, like the Adams people and all of those. I'm not going to talk a lot because I've got cancer and my voice is kind of off. But the thing that I wanted to say as far as the one of the things I learned at the Unitarian Church up here in Washington State was from a woman who was from the liberal religious youth in Massachusetts, and those were the people that got they passed the law against prayer in schools, and the atheists took over that and tried to make it theirs. But I just wanted to say that it was the Unitarian kids who actually passed that law. And then eventually it turned into the Unitarian Universalists, and they were, So I was also glad to hear of the gentleman who talked about his son in Oakland, because I grew up in Berkeley, and that's where I also went to the Unitarian Church. But I think it's really important people understand that it was not a Christian church. They did not believe in Jesus as the Son of God. They believed in him being that God was separate from that. And it's not,
Yeah, so the Unitarian Church has a... Well, thank you, Mary. The Unitarian Church has an extraordinary history. I mean, they were singled out for persecution. They were rendered illegal in Massachusetts in the 1600s and the early 1700s, and still persecuted well into the 1800s, the early 1800s, in that state and in several other parts of the United States. I said earlier that I haven't been in a church in years. I should correct myself. Louise and I, in addition to sitting zazen, going to a Zen temple regularly for quite some time, also when we used to live in Portland before this current iteration, we used to attend the Unitarian Church here in Portland. It's in downtown, and I mean, not real frequently. I've probably been there a dozen times, but for Sunday services. But it's nice to have community. It's nice to have fellowship with people who are seeking spirituality, but also seeking a better world, a better connection with other people, and trying to be supportive of each other. And that was always my sense of the Unitarian Church, that it was community first and everything else second.
Yes, and it was the unity with all living beings.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
And, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was thinking of the woman we had a Pentecostal minister who got thrown out of the church because he was gay, and he made our church very spiritual and lots of singing and stuff. So it was wonderful.
That's great.
Anyway, thanks.
Mary, I got to run, but thank you. Thank you. And we'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What an absolutely fascinating day, huh? Caesar in Chicago, Illinois, or is it Cesar? You are on the air.
Actually, you're right. It says that, but Caesar's fine. Thanks for taking my call. I'm glad we're talking about religion because it's something I want to ask you for a while. I'm a very proud Catholic, by born and definitely by choice now. And I definitely see myself as progressive, meaning I definitely believe a lot in science and I have a very strong faith. And there's a lot of people keep asking, how can 32 or 33% of Latinos have voted for Trump? And obviously, hypocrisy has a lot to do with it. But the number one thing that I've talked to too many people is religion. They just blindly focus themselves. And people can say, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But they don't understand. There's a lot of very good people that are very good neighbors. They're very good, very clean in the neighborhood. But that's all they just focus on. It's just abortion and people being gay. It's all they just focus on, just the horrible thing. They're like, oh, two males having sex. And then, which is the least thing about people that are gay. I don't know that many gay people, but I have zero problems with any of them at all, compared to a lot of hypocrites that they claim to call themselves Catholic as well. So my question to you, Tom, is how can I get through to them? And again, I'm not in the convincing people business, because some of them are just stubborn. And I know there's no one-liner, but what can I tell them to make them understand that they're really prosecuting themselves by saying that they're saying that it's their faith that are making them vote for all these nut job Republicans? Like, how can I get through them?
Yeah, first off, we now have the nation's second Catholic president. John Kennedy was the first. So if somebody is largely identifying as Catholic, I would say something like, hey, isn't it cool that we actually have a practicing Catholic in the White House? You know, Trump never went to church, but Joe Biden literally goes to Mass every single week. And he refers to his religion.
It's almost 60 years. If you think about it, it's almost 60 years to the day that we had John JFK and Joe Biden as president.
Yeah, it's amazing. But that might be an entry point. I mean, you know, the old lesson of, you know, trying to reach people where they are is first you have to figure out where they are, and then kind of, you know, hang out there a little bit. And so if somebody is like, well, I'm a Catholic and Catholicism teaches X, Y, you know, it is opposed to abortion, and so I'm going to vote Republican because Republicans are opposed to abortion. Well, how about voting Democratic? Joe Biden, while he's opposed to abortion personally, he doesn't think that the government should be playing a role in that, which, by the way, was Jesus's position. Remember, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. So, you know, I'm kind of happy that we've got a Catholic in the White House. It'll be interesting to see what impact that has, because Cesar, you are absolutely right. The Hispanic community, the Latinx, the Latino, however you would you know, characterize yourself and your community, is heavily Catholic. I mean, overwhelmingly Catholic. And I think religion is a huge factor in this stuff. And I've also caught some of the Catholic radio stations. I've seen clips of Catholic radio stations. I used to listen to one when we lived in Detroit years ago. They used to do the rosary every morning. I would listen to this. But they're pitching Trumpism, some of them. And it's like, whoa. And I understand that there's a lot of this going on with Spanish language radio. Do you know about that?
Well, there is a couple stations that we do listen to here in Chicago, and they really, I really haven't heard anything Trumpism. It's, but I do understand. I know that there's some from Texas. I have family in Houston where they tell me that they do listen to once in a while. You know, they it's the same lingo. I mean, you could catch it a mile away. It's like word for word, like with their blinders on. They just keep repeating the same thing, and then we got to expose. Like, oh, as soon as you hear that, it's got to hit you, click in your head. That's not true. You're lying. That's BS. You know, but here in Chicago, we're pretty open, we're pretty diverse, we're pretty proud, and we're pretty progressive to the most part.
That's good. At least from my point of view, that's great. Cesar, thank you very much for the call. Mark in St. Augustine, Florida. Mark, we only have about 40 seconds to the end of the show.
Okay, all right, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to follow up on what somebody said about Cindy Hyde-Smith, which was the thing she said about voting on the Sabbath.
Right, black people shouldn't vote on Sundays. Right.
But the Sabbath in Exodus would be Saturday, wouldn't it?
Right, which is short for Sabbath day, by the way. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yes, exactly. That's what somebody on Michelangelo Signorelli show pointed out a while back, and I'm like, somebody should, I don't know,
tap her on the shoulder and inform her, perhaps. Yeah, there you go. Mark, thank you. Thank you. That's a great one. And Michelangelo is a great talk show host. In fact, he's going to be, I believe, following me right now here on Sirius XM. So thanks so much for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Every single one of us, we have to show up. Otherwise, it's not a demos, it's not the people, right? It's not we the people. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it, and have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, especially the people around you. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM.